With me, Andrew Keane. You're the latest, the summary of the Brave New World conference. And the title of your talk is How to Fix the Future. So how do we do that?
And how long have I got?
we spoke about 10 minutes. So can you give a summary of 10 minutes?
Well, the right way to start this is, if I wrote a book called How to Fix the Future, the future is currently broken. So why don't you ask that question?
Is it broken right now?
Good question. Is the future broken? I think it's not working, the future. We believed in the future for a while. We thought the digital future was going to solve lots of our perennial problems of inequality and unemployment, cultural decay, economic innovation. But actually, it seems as if the digital revolution is compounding some of those problems. It's certainly creating a great deal of economic inequality. The threat of AI on jobs is self-evident. Most economists are deeply worried. The cultural decay, the impact of social media, narcissism, fake news, technological addiction, bullying, hatred of women and of minorities seems to be prevalent in social media. Its echo chamber culture means that we more and more talking to ourselves. And the business models of many Silicon Valley companies, particularly companies like Google and Facebook, are premised on essentially stealing ourselves, turning the users into products, taking our data, knowing more and more about us, and therefore destroying our privacy. So in those senses, cultural decay, surveillance capitalism, inequality, long-term unemployment, the future may indeed be broken.
Wow. And because yesterday of the conference we are at right now, Brave New World, it was also talking about autonomous warfare and drones.
Well, that's another.
So that's, I think, one thing, on top of that.
I haven't even written about that, but that's another aspect of the digital revolution, which is really terrifying. When you have smart machines fighting, presumably on our behalf, then the future is really broken.
Yeah. And what are because we can say, well, we have to ask initiative of the companies or of the users, or do we have to look at the governments, or is it not that simple?
Well, I have a sort of a meta idea about fixing the future, and then 5 very concrete sort of strategic pillars for going about doing it. The meta idea is agency. We need to reestablish our authority over machines. And that's a perennial theme in human history. We create technology which seems to dominate us, and then we reestablish our dominance over it. And I think that's a really important theme in fixing the future, particularly with the sort of specter of technology acquiring its own consciousness. I don't know whether that's a reality or not. I'm not a sophisticated enough AI expert to comment scientifically. But I do know that it would be if it is a reality, it's a very scary, unpleasant reality, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen. So we need to reestablish our authority over technology. That's the first thing. Agency has always been key in human history. And the second, the 5 pillars, if you like, the 5 strategic pillars for fixing the future are the same ones we've always used. We need more regulation. Certainly when it comes to autonomous robots fighting one another on our behalf, that's an area that needs very strong regulation. We also need more innovation. We need entrepreneurs to be creating products designed for humans and respecting humans rather than some of the products coming out of Silicon Valley, which are designed to be addictive and to mine us of our identities and our individualism. We need consumers to be more aggressive in demanding these products. We need more responsible citizens fighting to build a better world, whether it's as teachers or lawyers or wealthy Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. We all have an obligation to making the world a better place. So the citizenship idea is extremely important. And finally, we need to reinvent our education system. The traditional education system has been built on the premises of industrial world, of trying to turn us into mini computers. We don't need to do that anymore. We already have mini computers that beat us in chess and beat us in math and beat us in Go and beat us in figuring out the law. What we need to focus on are the things that computers can't do: empathy, creativity. Computers can't really think for themselves. They can't at the moment. They can't be empathetic. They can't have goals. And so our education system needs to be re-architected along interesting principles like maybe Waldorf or Montessori that focuses on the human. Technology, I'm not a lot, we don't necessarily need to take all technology out of the classroom, but the Waldorf system, for example, which is now very popular in Silicon Valley, is premised on not allowing young kids, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, having access to screens because they want to focus on the human, on the creative, and I think that's really important. So regulation, innovation, consumer power, citizen engagement, and education. Those are the 5 premises. Think of them as a kind of technological stack. None of them work on their own. They need to be worked together. Often they bleed into one another, so they're not as siloed as some people might like. But it's a similar kind of response as to the Industrial Revolution. The problems of the Industrial Revolution haven't been entirely figured out, but today's industrial world is better than the one of the 19th century. Less exploitation or inequality. Working conditions are better. There are laws to protect unions. 11-year-old children don't work in factories. Pollution, at least in immediate sense, is less of a problem. So we have models, we have experiences, we have a history of fixing the future. Sometimes digital technology say the first time this has ever happened. This technology we've never had it before in human history. The technology might be new, but the problems, the challenges aren't new. And when people say this is the first time it's ever happened in history, it usually means that they're ignorant of history. They don't know anything that's happened in the past, so they just assume that what they're doing is new. This is a particular problem, I think, on the west coast of the United States, where people are deeply ahistorical in their attitude to the world.
And how do you see, because you're focusing on Silicon Valley, how do you see the rise of China and the use of technology there? Is it different, or do you see the same parallels?
In some ways, the same parallels, but China, I think, is particularly terrifying because of the way in which the state, the Chinese state, which is certainly authoritarian and potentially even totalitarian, are using technology to enforce political obedience and using technology to punish people who don't agree with them. So in China, we have the reappearance of Orwell's 1984 in a much more sophisticated, ubiquitous digital context. So the problems of China, I think, are those of a true surveillance state. In the West, the problem in some ways, and particularly in America, is that the state is weak and is, for one reason or other, incapable of taking on private corporations. What worries me in the United States is the power of Google and the power of Facebook. What worries me in China is the power of the Chinese government. And unfortunately, in China, the supposedly, quote unquote, independent companies like Baidu are closely associated with the state. They don't really have the kind of economic, cultural, or political independence that companies like Google or Facebook have in the US. So China is very worrying in a different sense. And I think the great debate of the 21st century will be between the Chinese model of surveillance state capitalism and Western democracies. And Western democracies need to revitalize and reinvent themselves if they're going to compete. Because the problem is that the Chinese model in some ways works. It's very attractive in terms of its economic development and, I guess, political stability and coherence. So the Chinese model of authoritarian surveillance capitalism is a much more compelling one in the developing world than, say, the Soviet model in the 20th century of centralized bureaucratic socialism, which was essentially just inefficient and unpopular. The Chinese model actually works. So the great debate will be between the Chinese and the Western model, and we need to make sure that our democracies work. At the moment, particularly in places like the United States and the UK, our democracies aren't working very well.
All right. Thank you for the short synopsis.
Well, it wasn't that short.
It wasn't that short. I'm looking forward to your talk.
Well, so am I. Maybe you can give it for me.
I will just play the audio. And if people want to know more, they can buy your book, How to Fix the Future.
If I had a book, I would waive it. But How to Fix the Future, I hope they enjoy it. Thank you.
It's your most recent. Thank you very much.
Bye.